Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound for February 3rd, 2025. Vic Morren along with Neil Smith, and we will be welcoming our special guest from the NHL on TNT and NBC Sports Philadelphia, Brian Boucher, shortly to discuss a number of trades. But first question, did you see your shadow yesterday?
I did. And I guess that means another 6 weeks of winter.
Tell me if you remember me getting on this soapbox last year, but 6 more weeks of winter is supposed to be a bad thing. And if anybody reads their calendar, 6 weeks from February 2nd is March 16th, which is actually 4 days before the start of spring anyway.
Right, because the equinox is on March 21st, right?
Right. Or it's, I don't know if it's the 20th, 21st this year, but whatever the case, the 6 weeks is before spring. So people stop complaining about the long winter. We're going to get through it.
Poor Phil.
I got nothing more to say about that Punxsutawney guy. So,
okay.
All right, we move on. So as we usually start our show, 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. And got a little game show theme going here, Neil. Starting off with title of this show, Let's Make a Deal. The Vancouver Canucks make 2 deals on Friday evening. The big principals, JT Miller goes to New York. Philip Hedl goes to the Vancouver Canucks. There was a second deal by Vancouver with Pittsburgh. Also, we're going to talk about a Dallas-San Jose trade, and we're going to visit and actually revisit, because we did this on Friday on short shifts, but now that we have Boucher with us, we're going to talk about the Philadelphia-Calgary deal.
Yeah, that's great, and I can't wait to hear what Brian says about all these deals, especially the Philadelphia deal.
Number 2, the price is right. The salary cap is heading up, currently $88 million this year, bumping to $95.5 next year. We're told this has already been guaranteed. And then speculation in the 2 following seasons, 26-27 and 27-28, the bump to $104 and $113.5 respectively. So Neil and I are going to engage in some conversation about economics later on in the show.
It's hard to fathom those numbers, but I guess that is living in the years 2025.
Number 3, match game. And we're talking match penalties here. Ryan Hartman has been offered an in-person hearing for ramming Tim Stutzler's face into the ice after a face-off in Ottawa's 6-0 win against the Wild on Saturday. Hartman had a little episode with Cole Perfetti of Winnipeg a season ago where he lifted his stick into his face, also off a face-off. In the spirit of crime doesn't pay, the Senators scored 3 power play goals off of that major penalty, which came right at the end of the second period, the last one coming with a 2-man advantage. This would be Hartman's 5th suspension, his last coming in April of 2024. And Stefan Nason of the New Jersey Devils, a hit to the head on the Sabres' Tage Thompson early in the third period during the Devils' 4-3 loss in Buffalo. Thompson, however, did pass concussion tests, so that punishment not likely to be as stiff. But a couple of things to watch out for, possibly by day's end on Monday, and we will share what the verdicts are when we have short shifts on Wednesday.
And for Ryan Hartman, of course, the only NHL player ever to be born in the state of South Carolina. He was actually born in Hilton Head, South Carolina. So a little bit of trivia there to add on to when he gets a suspension.
And I'm certain that Monty Hall, Bob Barker / Drew Carey, and Gene Rayburn, all legendary game show hosts, will certainly be impressed with that trivia.
You spent a lot of time in front of the TV.
We certainly have. And that wraps up 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc.
Well, it's our privilege and pleasure to welcome back to NHL Wraparound Brian Boucher, who is the color analyst for the national games of TNT and also does the Philadelphia Flyers on the home and road. But Brian, lately, the Flyers haven't been scoring too many goals, and luckily, the 3 shutouts in a row, you only had to be there for one of them.
Yeah, things have dried up for the Flyers here in recent games. Obviously, a lot of news out of Philadelphia with the trade that was made on Thursday. Some popular players go out. Some new players are going to come in. They haven't arrived yet. So quite a few call-ups right now for the Flyers, and a difficult time. I mean, goals aren't there. They're a scrappy team, but just right now having trouble finding the back of the net. We'll see if they can get that rectified in the games coming up prior to the Four Nations break. But certainly this team in a bit of a skid right now.
Brian, we're going to hit the 4 major deals that have taken place over the weekend. We're going to save the Flyers-Flames deal for last, but certainly the one that made the biggest noise was the Rangers and the Canucks, with the drama in Vancouver finally now winding down, with JT Miller having been dealt to the Rangers along with defenseman Eric Brandstrom and Jackson Dorrington. The Canucks, in exchange, get center Filipino, defenseman Victor Mancini, and a 2025 protected first-round pick for the Rangers. If that pick falls within the first 13, then the Canucks will receive the Rangers' first-rounder next year. But let's hit this one up front. What are the Rangers getting here that they're lacking, and how does this improve just the overall situation in Vancouver?
Yeah, I'll start with the Rangers first. I think that this is it's a good deal for Chris Drury, and I think a much needed boost to their forward group. I think, when I look at the Rangers, I don't want to say that their window is or was closing, but Panarin's not getting any younger. Zibanejad's not getting any younger. Kreider is not getting any younger. There are some guys there that you can see like that window of opportunity. It's kind of shutting, and you've got to do something in order to give this group a jolt. And I think JT Miller, first off, I'll say, just as a hockey player, I think he's an excellent player. I mean, he has skill. He plays with jam. He brings it when he's engaged. He brings it, and I think he's going to help this Ranger team in a lot of different ways. Now, I think obviously the off ice issues that took place in Vancouver. I think they're a concern. If other teams were looking at JT Miller, I think they were concerning, and I don't know that they wanted to add an element like that, an alpha dog in their locker room that could potentially hurt their group. But when I look at the Rangers and the connection that, from what I understand, Vinny Trocheck has with JT Miller growing up as kids in the Pittsburgh area, I think it's a calculated risk by Chris Drury that I think is going to pay off for their team. Because you bring in a guy that, as I mentioned, full of talent, full of jam, is an upgrade hockey-wise to Filipino, and not a knock on Filipino, but he is. It helps them down the middle, helps their power play, already starting to pay off dividends on the power play. This is a calculated risk for Chris Drury that I think was a good play and a much-needed play for a group that kind of. And remember, this team won the President's Trophy last year, so they're still a very good team. They've kind of hit they've kind of hit a tough patch where, they needed a little bit of a jolt, and I think it's going to give it to them. So I think it's a good trade for the Rangers. I think Miller's going to help in the short term. Long term, we'll see. I mean, he's got several years left on his deal, and $8 million eventually with the cap going up, I don't think is going to be an issue. And if he's happy, he could be a player that causes no problems for you. This could be a great destination for him. For Vancouver, a tough spot for them because, they're in a position where everybody knows their business, their dirty laundry. They know what's going on behind the scenes, and they're in a position of weakness, if you ask me, as far as making a trade for a really good player. But they get a guy in Filipino that if he stays healthy, first of all, they needed a center in return, right? If Filipino stays healthy, he's a good player. He's not JT Miller. Their team loses that bite that I talked of that Miller brings. But he's a good player. Victor Mancini, an intriguing prospect who kind of late bloomer, had a great start out of camp, could potentially help them depth wise on the back end. So that's intriguing. And they get the first round pick. So, listen, hopefully they're hoping the Rangers don't fall apart down the stretch and they end up getting that first round pick. So they fix something in the future a little bit. They get a center in return that, fingers crossed, he can kind of stay healthy and help their team. But I think there's no doubt that for the Rangers, if Miller is a player and the personality, if he can stay in check, this is a trade that the Rangers they're going to win, in my opinion.
I agree with that, Brian. I think that this was almost a Sam Pollock deal where the team that gets the best player wins the deal. Remember that those days when we used to say that all the time, and clearly Miller's the best player in this trade. It'll be interesting to see if the Rangers can dig their way out of their self-inflicted hole that they've got themselves in from the Trouba, Goudreau, and all that other nonsense that went on. They seem to be coming around a little bit, but in Vancouver, it's funny, isn't it, Brian? Like I was thinking as you were speaking, one of the things that will kill an NHL team faster than anything is when you let things get public, right? I mean, we all know that. And both these teams let their dirty laundry get public. Rangers basically put it out on a line and put it in front of everybody and said, look at our dirty laundry we've got in the backyard here. In Vancouver, because of the scrutiny, because of the amount of media that the Canucks have, I guess it was hard to keep it just within the locker room, what was going on with Pedersen and Miller. But isn't it funny that when you're speaking, I was thinking this is two cases where both clubs let their locker room problem get public.
Yeah, and it's probably not the most ideal way to go about your business. I know there's certain management groups and general managers that, they work very hard to keep stuff like this internal. But as you mentioned, a Canadian market, Vancouver, very difficult with all of the attention that team gets, maybe to keep things under wrap the way you are. And truthfully, it sometimes can be difficult to trade out, long-term deals making $8 million. I mean, maybe a little bit easier now that there's some clarity on what the cap is going to be for the next several years going forward. So maybe teams are a little bit more comfortable with adding money and whatnot. But yeah, I don't think it's good when things get out. I think it certainly hurts teams as far as what the return value will be. But for the Rangers, I do think they win this deal. And, I know that they were trying to play with a little bit more bite. And I think their bottom end of the lineup, it's funny when you watch their team and you watch what Matt Rempe brings. I know he's a fourth line guy, but when you get in that building and you watch him take a shift and you see the anticipation from the crowd, you can feel it. And I think they needed a little bit of that more in the top half of their lineup with some skill, which is not easy to find. I mean, these guys do not grow on trees, players that play like that have the ability to, produce points and score goals. So, to get JT Miller to satisfy some of what Rempe does in the bottom end of the lineup, playing 8 minutes a night, to what Miller can do on the power play and on the first line. This is a trade that if he just behaves himself, this is going to be a heck of a trade for the New York Rangers. And I think they're going to, this is going to be a moment where they kind of start to take off, in my opinion, because they got the goaltending. Their back end, I think, has had some issues, but it seems like Borgen's getting comfortable there. You know what you get with Adam Fox. If Lindgren can stay healthy and Miller can regain his confidence, it's a pretty good back end. And with a solid goalie, I think the Rangers could kind of get this thing back on the rails.
Miller in just the second year of a 7-year deal for him, and has 4 points in 2 games. And Filipino did score in his first game for Vancouver against Detroit on Sunday. So a couple of hours after the JT Miller deal, the Canucks made a second trade, this one with Pittsburgh, acquiring Drew O'Connor, left wing, Marcus Pettersson, defenseman. So now they've got 3 Petterssons on their team because there are 2 Elias Petterssons. And in exchange, the Penguins get defenseman Vincent Desharnais, left wing Danton Heinen, defenseman Melvin Fernstrom, and a 2025 first round pick. So a lot of moving parts here in Vancouver. So we can continue on then, and then go on to the Penguins, where Kyle Dubas still believes this team can contend. So I don't know which piece you want to address first, but I'm just putting all the principles out there for you.
Well, let's go Vancouver. I think, shoring up a little bit more on the back end is never a bad idea, especially with the way Rick Tocchet coaches there. Like, they're a defense first team. And I think Marcus Pettersson is a guy that he's long, he's rangy. He kind of was, his play had dipped a little bit. I believe at the start of this year, was it last year, but we had him the other night. I had him the other night here in Utah, and I thought he played very well. And it seems like he's got his confidence back, his swagger. He's a UFA, so this is a chance for, Vancouver to see if they could be a potential fit going down the road. I like this move for Vancouver and shoring up that side of it. Drew O'Connor, a hardworking guy, and I don't know that, in your top 6, if he's a guy that would really get there. I think he's more of a third line, bottom 6 type of player, but certainly an energy guy, a guy that works, will help out depth wise in that regard, and maybe forms a pretty good third line if he plays with maybe Pius Suter and Kiefer Sherwood. So that could be a nice little pickup, an underrated pickup, in a good trade for Patrick Allvin to kind of bottom out, kind of shore up things with their club, especially after losing such a key piece like JT Miller, and see if they can kind of regroup on the fly. Certainly not writing off Vancouver by any stretch, even though they did lose the best player in that trade with the Rangers. I think that they, if they can get the goaltending, if they can defend, this is a team that, they're kind of a scary team in that regard. And don't forget, they were 1 win away from beating the Edmonton Oilers last year, had them down 3-2 in that series. So there's something in there that this team can figure it out, and we'll see if these guys can help out. Going to Pittsburgh, I guess they still do believe. I mean, it seems like anybody from the outside has a different view. Maybe internally they feel differently. Very difficult to bet against Sidney Crosby and what he can do. But, I think Vinny Desharnais is a guy that he is what he is. He's a big guy. He PKs probably, in my opinion, on a good team is probably a 6-7. But he'll probably get a chance in Pittsburgh to play, and it's important for his career to play good hockey so he can kind of keep it going. Heinen's just a depth guy that can plug into your lineup. It seems like they have a lot of those type of players in Pittsburgh, but they do get a first round pick, so the eye on the future, right? So they're trying to satisfy a couple of different things. They get the first round pick, and Melvin Fernstrom, don't know a ton about him. I asked somebody about him, and the only thing they said, boots are a little bit of a concern concern, but he can shoot the puck. So I don't know. I don't know how much of a prospect he is, but for Pittsburgh, kind of get some plug-in guys, and then some eyes on the future. And anytime you plug guys in, and Heinen was there in Pittsburgh before, so some familiarity there. You know, you plug guys in and you put them with guys like Crosby, maybe anybody can look good in that situation.
I think that it's interesting because as you said, Bouch, the Penguins pick up the Rangers pick. So that the one thing that Vancouver did, we want to make it clear, is they immediately flipped that first round pick that they had gotten from the Rangers. And it seems like the Penguins are trying to store up their chestnuts, for the draft down the road. And so Dubas is trying to keep an eye on the future, as well as I just don't understand what their plan is, though, because we've seen around the National Hockey League plans to try to rebuild, and we've seen plans when you've got good players. I think the Washington Capitals have shown everybody a way to do it if you can get the right players by giving guys a second chance who had a good resume at one time, weren't producing, their teams got rid of them. The Caps took them on in the case of 2 or 3 or 4 guys, and they've come right in there and gotten back to their potential. And now the Capitals are having a great year. That's the only team I've ever seen rebuild on the fly, try to keep their star player happy and yet seem to be rebuilding at the same time. It usually doesn't work, right? I mean, in the NHL, you've either got to go back down to the girders and try to rebuild it back up again. Or if you wait too long, like Detroit Red Wings and New York Islanders of old, the Stanley Cup New York Islanders, if you wait too long, maybe even Chicago, we could say, you end up with a tough situation because you end up with star players on bad teams. And I just wonder what your thoughts were about Pittsburgh, because I just don't understand which way are they going, or are they trying to go both ways, like in the Wizard of Oz? Some people go one way, some people go the other. Of course, some people go both ways.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's a weird situation because ownership changed hands, and it felt like the mandate, or what should have been done, was to get ahead of it and make some necessary moves to get younger in Pittsburgh, and that didn't happen. Ron Hextall, re-sign Letang and Crosby. They were able to get to that last year where they were unrestricted free agents, and to me, that's where the problems probably started. If you don't let it get to that point, but then the new, and this is just from the outside looking in, the new ownership comes in, and it looks like they're buying this. This franchise that is won Stanley Cups and has star players, but are past their prime, that, I think they're like, we got to keep these guys in order to put fans in the seats. Let's make it work this way. And it's just put them in a tough spot. Now, Kyle Dubas comes into a situation where he signs Tristan Jarry long-term, pretty early in free agency, makes that determination that Jarry's going to be his guy. Now Jarry's in the minors, so it's certainly not a great look. But I will say, I think the goaltending market is very difficult. It's hard to judge goalies. I feel like it's become more difficult more than ever, just because guys don't play like they used to play 60, 65 games. The idea of who a number one guy is, he might only have a year and a half of good hockey, and then he kind of falls off and is a different looking goalie. So, I mean, I will say that I think goaltending is a tough position to figure out, but if you get it wrong, it can really put you in a tough spot. So that's one of the issues too. And, and then, I said this the other night on TNT, like with Sidney Crosby, because Paul Bissonnette likes to stir the pot and get speculation out there about Sid getting traded. But what is Sid going to say? Sid will never come out and say, I want to get traded. It'll never happen like that. He's always going to say the right thing. The guy is 100% class. He's never going to sell out an organization. He's never going to sell out his teammates. So he's always going to say the right thing. Those conversations, if that was ever to happen, that has to be done in a private manner, in a respectful manner, in a way that if it was to happen, and I'm not saying that it is or it should, that, that would never get out, anything like that. So it's a tough situation there in Pittsburgh. But, when you look at the East, there is a bunch of teams that I feel like they're in the midst of in the middle of mediocrity, and anybody, if they catch fire, could move up the standings. Is Columbus for real? Is Detroit, the surge that they're making, is it for real? Is Ottawa really going to stay there? So the West, it seems more defined, right? I think it's between Calgary and Vancouver. And then after that, those guys are sellers. They're all done. But, if a team does catch fire in the last 30 games, maybe it is possible that Pittsburgh could make it. Do I see them winning a playoff round? No, I don't. But what is the end goal there? It's just, for a place that has had some good hockey for a long time, it certainly is a tough place right now. And what Washington did, I don't think anybody prognosticated that they would be where they are today after all those moves. Don't tell me, nobody could sit here and tell me that they were a fan of Pierre-Luc Dubois and that it was going to work out, or, Jacob Chikrin was going to have an effect on the team the way he's had, and that they knew Alexei Protas was coming, and so the stars aligned perfectly for Washington in a year that maybe a lot of people thought was going to be about Ovi's chase to break Gretzky's record. It's more than that. It's a great story, and Spencer Carberry should win the Coach of the Year because of it.
And look, also, is that if Washington ends up one in the conference, they're going to have to go into the playoffs with the target on their back. And I think after a year of feel good, to now be the one that's going to be the hunted might be a situation that may not be as comfortable as this regular season has been.
Yeah, imagine if it was the Caps Rangers 1-8, like that would be and the Rangers, catching heat at the right time, like that'd be an interesting matchup. And that's the thing about, I was on a team in 2010 that caught fire at the right time. And, we went to the Stanley Cup final. It's real. The timing of your good play is definitely something to be concerned about. And I think for Washington, you're right. They're going to have the target on their back come playoff.
And Neil, before we move on to the next trade, you had that situation in 95. You win the Stanley Cup in 94, and then you wind up drawing a Quebec team in a 1-8.
Excuse me, yeah. And the best team in the league that year was the Quebec Nordiques, soon to become, after that playoff series, they became the Colorado Avalanche, of course, and we all know what they did in 96. Yeah, it is. It's a tough go sometimes, and especially when you're winning with an older team, there is going to be a drop off. An older team can't keep it going year after year like a young team can do. The young team, like the Penguins of the mid-teens, they were able to win 2 in a row. The Tampa Bay Lightning was able to win 2 in a row. Really tough when you've especially in New York, where just hurry up and get it done before we fire you and get somebody else.
Over to the West. So early Saturday morning, the Dallas Stars made some noise acquiring center Mikael Granlund and defenseman Cody Ceci for a pair of picks. Both Granlund and Ceci are unrestricted free agents at the end of the season, Brian. So certainly a little bit of risk here in terms of acquiring these players, not knowing whether or not you're going to sign them. Both did play in the game against Columbus on Sunday. Granlund had an assist in that game.
Yeah, Dallas like we talked about the West, the bottom of it being really weak and those guys being sellers. But if you look at the top teams, to me, that's where the strength of the NHL is, and a bit of an arms race to arm up for what's going to be, a difficult playoffs out West. With the injury to Tyler Seguin, obviously, Jim Nill, I think, had to, fill some holes there in their group. I think what's good here and what it tells me is that they didn't give up any prospects. No names went the other way, just picks. And so to me, this is Jim Nill going in. He believes in this group, and Mikael Granlund has had a great year in San Jose. rebooted his his value. I think I don't think his value was this high when Pittsburgh shipped him out. So good job by him. And I think again, this is a guy that helps down the middle that, with Hintz and Duchesne, and now Granlund goes in as a third line center. It's a good pickup for Jim Nill, a veteran guy that I think is going to help their group. And as I mentioned, not giving up any players, guys like, a Logan Stankhoven or a Maverick Bork or, any of these guys to help you too. So you keep the young guys that you have in place, because those guys are going to be important for you, going forward, like in the future to maintain their strength as a team, but kind of push it in a little bit and say, let's go for it. I like this Dallas team. And I think CC helps out too in the back end, a guy that probably, I think will play with Esa Lindell, a right shot. Has played some big playoff games before, the experience. So I think it's a good solid pickup for the Dallas Stars, and for San Jose, just keep filling the cupboard for picks and looking down the road. They got a great young player in Celebrini, and Will Smith looks pretty good. The future's bright in San Jose, but they just keep stocking the cupboard, and hopefully we'll see what that team looks like in 3, 4, 5 years.
Guys, I really like this trade, this Dallas trade. And I guess it's so reminiscent for me of 94. But what I like about it is they got these two guys that can really help in the playoffs that are, as Bush, you just described them perfectly. And, Jim Nill's pushing all his chips to the middle of the table, but he's doing it early too. He recognized that he's got to do it in February 1st or February 2nd, whatever the date was, and not wait till the deadline. I mean, in my day, Bush, you remember this, all the players sat around waiting for the deadline to see if they were going to get traded or not on that day. And I often compare the trading deadline to men doing Christmas shopping for their wife. I mean, we all wait till Christmas Eve, right? And then go out and get something. and that's what they used to do at the deadline.
And then you get the wrong gift.
Of course. Well, you can't, but getting the right gift is an oxymoron. You cannot do that. That's not possible with your wife. But I think that, I think Jim Nill recognizing that he's got to move quick and get these guys, because these are the pieces he needed. He needed that center. He needed that defenseman. And I got to move now. I can't mess around. I got to go. I really think that he deserved a lot of credit for that. And he went to a team. And it reminds me too, guys, I'm sorry to keep bringing up 94, but what else can I do? Chicago was out of the playoffs, although I had to deal with Pulford. And of course, the Edmonton Oilers were out of the playoffs, and I had to deal with another gem in Sather to get McTavish. But it's the same thing. San Jose's well out of the playoffs. The Dallas Stars are an odds-on contender, and he went ahead and did it quick. Didn't wait till till Christmas Eve to go and get the Christmas present.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show you too that good work by Jim Nill to keep his prospects. I think that seemed to me to be important for him. I think it's funny. Like, if you like your prospects, you know the player. There's a personality there. There's a connection there. You know what you got. I think the pick is intriguing to teams like San Jose who are rebuilding. I think they like the idea of a first round pick. I think that's them, excites them. And it's funny, like, I feel like now, because in that trade, right, was it Tony Amonte you sent to Chicago?
Tony Amonte for Noonan and Matto. And let me just say, I hated that trade when I did it. I hated it because I knew that Noonan and Matto didn't have much time, and I knew they weren't stars, and I knew Amonte was going to be a star. But there was no way that the coach that I had at that time wanted to have Tony Amonte instead of Noonan and Matto. So, yeah, I mean, I hated trading prospects back then, but what could you do?
Yeah. Well, that's the price you pay to win a Stanley Cup, right? Fortunately for you guys, it paid off. I mean, there's oftentimes teams make these deals, and in the end, they're out in round 2, round 3, and kicking themselves. At least you got a Stanley Cup ring to show for it.
I think if we hadn't Vic can attest to this, that I probably would still be hanging somewhere in New York. Somewhere in Central Park, you'd find me from a tree if we hadn't won that year, because that's the way it is in New York. You're a hero or a zero, one way or the other. Sorry, Vic, go ahead.
No, not a problem. Before we move on to the Flames Flyers deal, which Neil and I did discuss when it had broken on Friday on our short shift show, but we want to hear more from you on that one. I just want to go back to CC for 1 second and just the depth that he gives Dallas. Now that it is known that Miro Heiskanen is going to be out probably for most of the remainder of the regular season, I think the Stars are hoping to get him back by the start of the playoffs. But CC, while he certainly doesn't have the two-way game that Heiskanen has, certainly shores up that back line for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Offensively, I think, a guy like Thomas Harley is, can fill in for what Heiskanen brings on the offensive side of things. But the importance of, having a steady guy on the back end, can PK, play hard minutes, right? Shutdown type guy. I think that's important to get that. And I think Lundqvist is out as well, right? Long term. So not, I think it's an upgrade for sure on a guy like Lundqvist. I think, CC is a guy that just strikes me as a playoff type guy that I think will pay dividends when it really gets hairy, in May.
And Bush, before Vic outlines the big one that we really want to hear from you about, which is your own Philadelphia Flyers, let me just say, before he says to the audience what was in this deal, I have no idea what either team was doing in this trade. So I want to say that before Vic outlines it, because I wanted to get that in before your answer came, because honestly, I've looked at it. I got no idea why either side did this, but let's have Vic outline what the trade was.
Because I set the table well. So the Flyers trade left wing Joel Farabee and center Morgan Frost, who, by the way, had a goal in his first game for the Flames in their win at Seattle on Sunday. In exchange, the Flyers get left wing Andrei Kuzmenko, left wing Jacob Pelletier, a 2025 second round pick, and a 2028 seventh rounder. So the two players that the Flyers acquire, Kuzmenko is a UFA at the end of the season, Pelletier an RFA. Farabee has 3 more years at $5 million a year, and Morgan Frost is a restricted free agent. So now that we have wrapped the package, now it's time for you to unwrap it for us.
Okay. Well, I think first off, from a Flyers standpoint, Farabee and Frost were two very popular players inside that locker room. Well-liked, very good guys. I think the issue, and I'll start with Farabee, is that he's making $5 million for the next 3 years. Okay. And I think that was a number that was uncomfortable for the Flyers, seeing what they want to do going forward. If Farabee was on, say, a $2.5 million deal, I think he'd still be a Philadelphia Flyer. I think it's just a case of they just wanted to, they know what the player is. They know what he's getting paid. They know what they need to get to be better. And they felt like it was going to be a block going forward. So the idea that they could trade Farabee and not retain a single dollar, I think, was very exciting for Philadelphia. I think that was important right there. As far as Frost is concerned, bit of an interesting negotiation last time when he was up on his last deal. I think the two sides were far apart for quite some time. Eventually they settled on, I think it was a 1.8 and a 2.4 2-year deal. But, judging by the last negotiation, I think, Frost was going to be asking for a significant pay raise going forward. And considering what the Flyers are trying, looking for, they need centers, right? They need it, and they need it badly. how they address it is that's for another show probably. I mean, to dissect how they may do that. But I don't think they got the sense that, in their opinion, Frost was a 1 or a 2 center on their team. So maybe he is on another. Maybe somebody else views him differently. But I think in Calgary, he's a good pickup because you got Kadri, right, and you got Lindholm, and I think him slotting as a 3 center there is a perfect place for him. Matchup wise, it's perfect. He'll play in the power play. He's a skilled player. But he can't be one of your top 2 centers like he was here in Philadelphia. He had plenty of opportunity here to play with good players. He played with Tippett. He played with Konechny. He played with Michkov. And I think like the results were still you wanted more. There were some nights you just didn't notice him. He has skill. There's just some nights that he kind of faded off to the perimeter of the rink and things didn't get accomplished. So I think the Flyers just recognize that, like, going forward, they want more in the center positions, and they didn't want to pay north of $4 million for that particular player. If Farabee was making less, I think he'd still be a Flyer because, you know, he did a good job. He stuck up for teammates. He loved being a Flyer, and that's a tough loss for them. In return, what they get, Andrei Kuzmenko is a UFA. I don't know what the plans are for him going forward. I don't get the sense that they're like, hey, we're going to re-sign this guy. But on a team that is starving for offense, is starving for goals, starving to help their power play, he checks off those boxes. And who knows? Is he a motivated player coming here? Can he help them offensively? We'll see. I don't think they have any expectations to say, hey, let's get this guy locked up for 3 years. I wouldn't even be shocked if it's a one and done for Kuzmenko, but he's got to prove it to them. And a guy like Peltier, he's cheap. He hasn't quite made his mark yet in the NHL, a former first-round pick. By all accounts, it seems like he's got a tremendous motor. He works, a great personality, well-liked in the locker room. And I think that's a guy that they like bringing in because he can kind of fit into a group that is a hardworking group that plays with energy, that sticks up for one another. So he helps in that regard. And then finally, the most important thing for the Flyers is they get a second-round pick. They got a second-round pick, didn't have to retain any salary. And I think that really, they like that. Now they've got 7 picks inside the top 2 rounds going into this draft. Will they use all 7 picks? I don't think so. I think some of those picks are going to be used to make a move to get a player that may be in his 20s that can help this team going forward. That would be an upgrade to, say, a Morgan Frost. If you follow me, if you're following what I think is the long-term play. Can they make a deal? I don't know. We'll find out. That's for the summertime to see how those picks play out, to see if that upgrade is there. So I think it's still with the Flyers. We'll see how this plays out with how they move going forward with with the draft picks that they have. For Calgary, they pick up 2 guys that are in their 20s that I think it's not saying to their team we're selling. It's not saying we're adding like an older player. It's kind of like both things. It satisfies both things. And I think it's a good situation for Farabee and Frost. If Farabee plays on the top line, what an opportunity for him. And if Frost is a third line center, it's the perfect spot for him for matchup wise and playing in a Canadian market where he might get a jolt.
Brian, thanks for that explanation too, because that makes sense with the money part with Farabee and Frost. On the outside, it was really hard to analyze that trade because here's 2 young guys that I watch all the time and think are pretty good, and they move them out. So it just, to me, I didn't understand it. Do you get the sense, and you may not know the answer to this, that John Tortorella is involved with Danny and Keith Jones in agreeing and coming together on the trades, or do you get the sense that in Philadelphia, Danny and his crew go down and tell John, here's what we're going to do, and then they just do it? Or do you get the sense that John is part of that decision making?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they do talk a lot. I think they bounce ideas off each other. I think at the end of the day, I think Danny and Jonesy, they're tasked with making those hard decisions for the future of the team and what they see. I think they think they value towards his input. I think they certainly bounce things off of him. But I do feel that the Torts is the coach. He coaches, and they're tasked with managing and figuring out how they're going to construct this team going forward. But I think they certainly do collaborate, and there's a lot of communication, and I think they are in a lot of ways on the same page. And I think it's a good working relationship between all three. So, but I think at the end of the day, I think everybody kind of, they do their jobs at the end of the day.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, and I had my style. Every GM has his own style. I know I work with Pierre Gauthier in Anaheim as a consultant, and I said, well, what does your coach think about it? He says, I don't talk to the coach about that. I make the trades. And I was like, what? So the reason I'm asking you that, Brian, is because Kuzmenko comes in and joins Michkov, and we've all seen that, Torts has. And, and part of it is a strategy for John in how to get through to players. And we know there's been some Michkov issues, and we know that Kuzmenko knows Michkov from Russia. Do you think like he was right on board bringing this player in? Because I think it's really important that he was on board to have another Russian guy come in that could maybe help Michkov with his game, with his understanding, with the translation, even in the locker room.
Yeah. I wish I had more insight for you on that one. I don't know, to be honest with you, on that one. I wonder if that was just more of like, okay, if we're taking on 5 million plus, we need to move out 5.5, right, out of Calgary, so that you really have no choice. I think in that matter, that's kind of how that's an outsider's looking. I have no insight into it, and I don't know, but when I see this team now, the Flyers, and they need to score goals. They got a guy that, did score 39 in the NHL before, could help them out. I'm not really sure. I'd be lying to you if I said I've watched his games with a fine-tooth comb and can see what type of, alertness he has defensively. I don't know. And I will say that if he doesn't do his job defensively, he will not play with Torts. I mean, that's the one thing about Torts is he treats everybody the same in that regard. And certainly Michkov has had his bumps in the road with regards to that. But it's no different for, he benched Joel Farabee. He benched Morgan Frost. He's benched Travis Konechny. He's benched Sean Couturier. I mean, he does it to everybody. I mean, this is not something that is new, and it's the way Torts coaches. And I think at the end of the day, when you pull away and you put things in perspective, I think players, it's hard, but he's going to get it out of you. And if he's not going to get it out of you, and if it doesn't work out, then you probably won't stick around playing for him, but you will learn some things along the way. I mean, so we'll see how Kuzmenko fits in here. I mean, I hope he comes in and brings a jolt offensively, because the team needs goals. Their power play, it started out good at the start of the year, and then it petered out. It'd be great to see the power play be a game changer and keep them in the hunt. These next 28 plus games, I don't know how many we have. It's around that number. Last year the Flyers, had a tough finish, and it was hard. It was hard because these guys, they battled like heck to get in a good position, and then it fizzled out. You don't want to see that again. So hopefully Peltier gets a great opportunity here. Hopefully Kuzmenko can bring some of that offense. Does that mean they sign him? I don't know. I don't know, but we'll see how he is defensively, how much ice time he'll get if he's a responsible player.
Before we let you go, you got the Chiefs on Sunday?
Nah, I can't. Go Birds. Go Birds. Come on. Can't say that in Philly.
Oh, geez. Bouch, you're great. You're great. We love having you on here. It's such a pleasure. And you really give us some great insights into things that are going on around the league. Not only just the Flyers, by the way, but on the other teams too. There's only so much you can get from the TV screen when you're watching at home. When you're at the games, you're always one step ahead of everybody that's just watching them on TV. I learned so much. I go to all the Islander games, and there's nothing like being there in person to really know how guys are playing and what guys are all about. So we thank you for coming on here again. And the best of luck the rest of the way with TNT, and for the Flyers and John and Danny and Jonesy, best of luck there too.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Always great to be with you. And big weekend coming up. Hopefully, there's a big party in Philadelphia. As I said, go Birds.
Brian Boucher has been a guest on a couple of occasions prior to this one, Neil. And when he breaks down these deals, just how well he's tuned in with the rest of the NHL, not just the Flyers.
Oh, no, he is a national guy, and he knows the league entirely. I mean, nobody can know every single player in the National Hockey League with 32 teams, but Brian Boucher is as close to that as you're going to find.
Remember, folks, that our website is NHLWraparound.com, and on Tuesday of this week, we will be dropping our latest episode of New York Centric. Once again, we'll be joined by Arthur Staple from The Athletic, and our short shifts will drop on Wednesday and Friday. The salary cap. Big bumps coming up in the next several years. For this year, it's $88 million. Then we'll bump by $7.5 million next year to $95.5. Then $104 million and $113.5 in the seasons to follow. So, Neil, who actually wins here?
I think everybody wins, but mostly the players win because their salaries are rocketing up, and particularly if you're a good player. And now that we've got these numbers, we understand that the Draisaitl deal and the Shesterkin deal and the others that seemed completely outrageous when they made them, they might be livable now. And it might also give Stan Bowman and his Edmonton Oilers hope that they can sign McDavid, which they will, and have McDavid and Draisaitl and several others at enormous salaries, and yet keep the boys together, keep the band together, as they say. Whereas in Chicago, when he was GM there, they signed Kane and Taves and Duncan Keith to large contracts, and they weren't able to keep the band together. They had to slowly disperse different players that had been on their Stanley Cup teams, and it ended up that Chicago was out of the playoffs for quite a number of years.
Do you see any problem with players that have recently signed deals and now are seeing these big bumps in the cap that they may say, hey, you know what? I want to negotiate to a percentage of that cap that is reflective of my value. Can you see that happening?
Well, they may want to do that, but that's where ownership and management says, well, tough nuts. You signed that deal and you wanted us to guarantee your future. Don't come back in the future and say, well, now I don't like what I agreed to. The only place where they've got to be real careful, Vic, I think, is, for example, in Colorado, where McKinnon is clearly their best player. And if you sign another player to a number greater than McKinnon, well, maybe Makar, but if you sign another player to a number higher than McKinnon, is McKinnon's agent going to come in and say, hey, wait a minute. I know we agreed to this, but you can't give Joe Blow more money than Nathan. So, that could be around the league like that. But players may want to renegotiate their deal. It's up to you to say, well, we're not doing it.
I got a few more questions for you here. We said that everybody's potentially happy here, certainly the players, but can you see certain teams not necessarily happy with this, that they don't want the ceiling to be this high? And certainly, an owner like Tom Dundon in Carolina, who is known for having the purse strings a little bit tighter than some of his contemporaries, they may not want this cap to be as high as it's going.
Oh, it makes for a competitive disadvantage for the small market teams, no doubt about it. I mean, I could name countless markets where they're going to be hard to compete if, in fact, they go by a business model. And what I mean by that is, for example, the Anaheim Ducks can't be going by a normal business model that says we'll spend so much of the money we make on player personnel because, Henry Samueli, who owns it, is a multi-billionaire and is very invested in Orange County, and so therefore takes a loss on the Ducks year after year. It doesn't take a genius to see that, because if you watch a game, there's a lot of empty seats a lot of nights while they're in this rebuilding process. The Buffalo Sabres have always been a small market team, and there you have a situation where the Pagulas have to make a decision. How far are they going to go into the red while they're doing this? And we can go on and on. You just mentioned one in Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina. They certainly can't get the kind of numbers of revenue that the big market teams can do. So it can add to a competitive advantage for the big market teams and a competitive disadvantage for the small market teams.
But when you were in New York, there was no salary cap, so you could spend at free will, and that didn't necessarily work to your advantage. So is this different now in this era than it was back when you were a GM?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing where I see that you could get yourself in real trouble now is that an owner says, yeah, we'll spend $100 million, and it's up to you to decide who gets it. Well, if you go out and do a Wade Redden deal, and by Wade Redden, I mean a disastrous deal that the Rangers did when Wade Redden was pretty much at the end of his career, and they gave him 6 years at $6 million, and he ended up, I think, with the last 4 years on the Hartford Wolfpack or being paid out. I mean, you can do disastrous deals under this, and by giving the money to the wrong people, and then that's going to hurt because if you have to do a buyout, that money stays on your cap and it gives you less money. So I think in some ways there's a lot more pressure on management now to get it right than there was in the old days of no salary cap. Now, having said that, in my day, if you sent a one-way contract to the minors, I don't care if he was making $300,000, if you sent a one-way to the minors, you're in big trouble as a manager. And that doesn't seem to be the way it is now, because as we know, and Brian Boucher talked about the, Tristan Jarry on a big deal from the Pittsburgh Penguins finds himself in the minor leagues and at, I think, $5 million a year playing in Wilkes-Barre. So it's different, and it gives some, again, I just think it gives some teams a distinct advantage, other teams a distinct disadvantage.
That segues perfectly into one other question about this, and that is, do you see the advantages for teams that are playing in tax-free states such as Texas and in Florida and in Vegas? Are they going to continue to reap these benefits? And conversely, are Canadian teams going to benefit, or are they going to suffer more because of this bump?
Well, starting with the tax-free states, when we say tax-free state, of course, we mean state income tax. Everybody has federal income tax. So, and that's the biggest portion of your income tax is from the federal level. In the state level, to have no income tax would be wonderful. But it's not everything. And yes, do the Dallas Stars and the two teams in Florida have an advantage without state income tax? I would think they do, but the players have got to want to play there. The Canadian teams have a distinct disadvantage because of the currency, the difference in currency value to the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. I think right now it's hitting around 35%, which means that, to pay you $100,000, I've got to bring in $135,000 in revenue. So it's a distinct disadvantage to the Canadian teams and to their fans, who are going to have to pay higher ticket prices and higher numbers for for different things, as well as, don't forget, in the Canadian markets, particularly Ontario, that has Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators, they have a huge sales tax, 13% sales tax when you go in. So Alberta is the one non-provincial income tax state province. So Alberta is like Florida and Texas, where they only get the Canadian federal income tax. They don't get provincial income tax in that city, those two cities, Edmonton and Calgary.
That's a lot of economics to unpack there.
Sure is.
Right. But nonetheless, it's going to be a part of the new business models going forward, effective July 1st of this coming year. Let's bring it back onto the ice. And two tremendous hockey games on Saturday night. Going to start off with Winnipeg and Washington, the number 1 and 2 teams in the NHL standings, and also entered the game numbers 1 and 2 in the league in team defense. And of course, you know what happens whenever you get those top defensive teams going against each other. You get a 5-4 overtime win for the Winnipeg Jets. But, there's something about this game, and then the one I'm going to mention after this, which is going to be Edmonton and Toronto, where you see as much from the teams that lose as you do for the teams that win. And in this game, the Capitals came back from 3 different 2-goal deficits to get the game to overtime. Alex Ovechkin scores number 877 with a shot from the blue line that just ate up Connor Hellebuck, who had a clean look at it. So, yes, I know I've been taking my shots at Ovi for the empty net goals, but God, this guy can still shoot a puck. But nonetheless, Josh Morrissey scores his second goal of the game to win it for Winnipeg, who now reside atop the NHL standings with 77 points.
Yeah, as you said, 2 great games, and the Caps showing that they're for real again. I don't know how many times they've done that, but they did it again. They showed they're for real, and that they're going to be a force in the playoffs. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, last year's playoffs for the Washington Capitals was not good because they snuck in, underneath the doormat to get into the playoffs last year, and they went out quickly in 4 straight. But this year, they're banging down the door. They're not coming in under the doormat. They're ramrodding the door. So it'll be interesting to see how they and the Jets do. And of course, the Jets had a disappointing playoff last year going out early. We'll see if they can rectify that.
So the other game was Toronto and Edmonton, and the Leafs got out to a quick 3-0 lead in that game. Oilers spent the entire night trying to come back, and they thought that they had, except Leon Draisaitl's tying goal with 2:21 left was waved off by an offside, which was by a toenail. Nonetheless, the Oilers kept coming. Joseph Woll, 45 saves, and he had to stop Evan Bouchard and Corey Perry in the final second of that game. John Tavares had an assist. Matthew Nyes, a goal and an assist, returning to the Toronto lineup. Oliver Ekman-Larsson did leave with a lower body injury. But really, to put a bow on this, Neil, these were 2 absolutely scintillating games.
They sure were. And Wall's nickname might be Brick, for Brick Wall. Anyway, no, 2 great games and great teams. And, again, they're like playoff games, right? That's why they're so good, because they're like a playoff game and the intensity is there. So good stuff.
There was a huge NBA deal over the weekend. And in watching these 2 games, I could not have cared less who got traded in the NBA or where. There is nothing better than the NHL when it is played at the level that we saw on Saturday night.
Even if there were no games on the day of the NBA trade, I couldn't care less about the NBA trade.
So I love you. Milestones. Jonathan Quick, the New York Rangers, becomes the 15th goaltender and first American-born netminder to reach 400 wins in a 34-save effort over the Vegas Golden Knights. And Florida head coach Paul Maurice wins his 900th game. That puts him fourth all-time. He was actually fourth all-time before that, but now he joins Scotty Bowman, Joe Quenneville, and Barry Trotz in the 900 win club. And what an accomplishment for the defending Cup champion coach.
Paul Maurice, the former Windsor Spitfire player. Good for him. And took a lot of criticism, when he left Winnipeg. And Florida Panthers took a lot of criticism for hiring him. Are we going to get this paint drying, play that Maurice has his teams play? He'd rather watch paint dry than watch his teams and stuff like that. Done quite the job there. And he's quite a character too. I love his interviews and I love the things he says, and got good sense of humor and quick wit.
Let's also remember that in the middle of winter, he picks up about 110 degrees to the good, being in South Florida as opposed to Winnipeg.
Well, Winnipeg's done okay too without him, so we got to give them credit. They haven't won a cup, but they've sure done okay, both last year with Rick Bowness and then this year with Scott Arniel. So they've done pretty well.
Do we dare say cup final?
I don't. I'll believe it when I see it.
All right. Let's move on to some player notes because there's a lot of significant injury news here. And Kirill Marchenko of the Columbus Blue Jackets, broken jaw, and of all things, hit with a puck while he was sitting on the bench. This happened during the second period of their game in Dallas on Sunday. Marchenko had his jaw reset. He has remained in Dallas while the rest of the Blue Jackets have headed to Buffalo. 21 goals to lead the Blue Jackets, 34 assists and 55 points. That's second only to Zach Werenski. But boy, this team just... They can't catch a break. I mean, we've documented the tragedy over the summer. They've been without Captain Boone Jenner for the entire season, although Jenner is potentially nearing a return either right before or after the Four Nations tournament. But Sean Monahan is also out. And how much can this team possibly absorb and still remain in a playoff hunt?
Yeah, well, you know what? They've done miraculously this season, and I don't put it past them to keep going. But I was just about to say the same thing, that damn dark cloud came back again. I mean, for a puck to hit and break your guy's jaw on the bench is something else. And let's hope that he can play. They wire it up, and some guys can play with a broken jaw with a mask on. So we'll see if Kirill Marchenko can stay in the lineup.
I remember once when Bobby Hull broke his jaw and got in a fight. So you never put it past hockey players to come back earlier than expected from even the most horrendous injuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Josh Norris of the Ottawa Senators out multiple weeks. He was hit twice in the Senators 6-0 win over Minnesota on Saturday. Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks did not play Sunday against Detroit, was kind of laboring in the late stages of the game Friday at Dallas, so he missed last night's overtime loss to the Detroit Red Wings. Over to Dallas, speaking of which, Miro Heiskanen, who we had spoken about with Brian Boucher, seeing a specialist regarding a knee injury suffered against the Vegas Golden Knights. The team is hopeful that they will have him back by the playoffs. And that would certainly be a huge boost to that lineup, Neil, that looks like it is really rearing itself for the playoffs, as we discussed with Brian.
Yeah, that's right. They need, but Heiskanen is a big part of that team, so we'll see if he can get back. And hopefully, because they're doing some good stuff in Dallas, and hopefully Heiskanen can be part of it.
Logan Cooley of Utah out indefinitely with a lower body injury. He will be reevaluated after the Four Nations face-off. He was hurt last Wednesday against Pittsburgh. He has 15 goals and 43 points for the Utah Hockey Club this season. Owen Tippett made the trip to Colorado, but did not play for the Flyers after being hit by Brendan Dillon January 29th in New Jersey. Perhaps he plays Tuesday in Utah. For the New York Islanders, goaltender Semyon Varlamov out indefinitely now with a lower body injury. He has not played since November the 29th. And both Matt Barzal and Scott Mayfield left Saturday's win in Tampa. Barzal blocked a shot, and Mayfield looked like he came off the boards rather awkwardly in that game. Neither played in the loss against Florida, which snapped the Islanders' 7-game winning streak. Adam Enstrom of the New York Rangers left Saturday's loss against Boston. Jimmy Vesey played on the fourth line. And Vesey had been scratched in 9 straight and 10 out of his last 11, and had said prior to that game over the weekend that he feels he has lost his purpose on the club with New York.
Wow, that's quite a thing. Well, that's sort of saying, get me out of here. If in fact, I mean, Vesey has made a couple of great turnarounds in his career. You know, he started with New York and, went over to Toronto for a while and so on. And then back in New York. And I thought he was a pretty useful piece. But once Edstrom and for whatever reason, they keep playing Rempe, that took away some ice time from Vesey.
Yeah. And Sam Carrick also on that
Sam
fourth
Carrick.
line.
Yeah. And he's emerged as a pretty good player.
Yes, he has. Let's go to the waiver wire because we all love that. Brandon Saad signed a 1-year, $1.5 million contract with Vegas soon after clearing waivers on Friday, and he did appear in the game at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. And Adam Boqvist claimed off waivers by the Islanders on Friday, so now this adds to Tony DeAngelo and Scott Perunovich bolstering the Islanders' backline through some injuries, and Boqvist actually scored in his first game in Tampa in the victory that wound up giving the Islanders the 7th of that 7-game win streak.
And a young guy, Isaiah George, returned back to Bridgeport when they got all these guys off waivers. They may have to go back to that well again, depending on how bad Mayfield is. He took quite a tumble into the boards that you mentioned, the lower body injury on Saturday night in Tampa.
Have we had enough of injuries for today?
I think so.
All right. This is the human side of the story. And earlier in the show, we had talked about the long-awaited trade of either JT Miller or Elias Pettersson away from the Vancouver Canucks. It turned out that it was Miller going to the New York Rangers. But really the deeper story with this has been how the discontent between these two players got out into the public in Vancouver. And I know, Neil, you've been very straightforward with me about this, in that there is a right way to handle conflict within a team, and this certainly wasn't it.
No, and there is a right way to handle anything that goes on inside closed doors, in anywhere, in a corporate setting, in a dressing room, locker room, anywhere where it's important that you all sing from the same hymn book. And the way that these internal issues should be handled is, first of all, by the captain and the assistant captains and the leaders of the players should try to sort this stuff out so that it doesn't even get to the coaches. And then if they can't do that and it gets to the coaches, then the coaches have got to call everybody in and say, okay, have a team meeting. They got to have meetings with the players that are in controversy. Let's say you had a problem between a trainer and a player. You could have that. You've got to get these things sorted out. And if the coaches can't get it sorted out, then the upper management, the GM and so forth, they have to get involved to see if they can sort it out. And all the while, through those three levels, it should never get public. It should be denied. And if there's any smell of it out there, they should try to squash it, because you're in a public entertainment business that depends upon your image to the public, to how many people want to see your product and how many people want to come and pay for your product. And if you let your dirty laundry, as we talked about with Brian Boucher, be out there in front of everybody, it's going to be very disgruntling to your fans and to people on the outside. They don't want to think about that. They want to think about how their team might win the next game or so on. So there is a right way and a wrong way to handle these things. And obviously, in the case of the Rangers, with their trade memos and their, the Kreider name getting out, the Trouba name getting out, the Goodrow way they did that getting out. This is not a smart way to handle difficult situations.
Did you like the way the situation in Boston was handled better when rumors got out with a potential rift between Brad Marchand, the captain, and David Pastrnak, and that it was addressed up front immediately? The rumors were squashed, and we really haven't heard anything about that in the last couple of weeks now.
Well, that's exactly it. The captain did what a captain should do. He came out aggressively and called down that rumor and said that Pastrnak was one of his best friends. Brad Marchand did that, and Pastrnak also backed him up, and it was killed. It was immediately killed. And that's what you have to do. Now, in Vancouver, I do know that Miller tried to completely deny it, and Pettersson tried to deny it. But obviously, they didn't deny it heavily enough. And obviously, there really was something there. So in the case of Marchand and Pastrnak, there wasn't something there, obviously, or they couldn't have gotten to it quick enough. And in the case of the Vancouver situation, there was something there, but it was like everybody just sort of hung their head and said, well, there's not much we can do about this. And it ends up where Miller gets moved. And I don't know. It's too bad, because Vancouver, as we know, ended in first place last year in the Pacific. We're one win away from knocking out Edmonton. And now this year they're scraping to get into the playoffs. So it's a tough year for Vancouver in many different ways.
Do you think other teams take note of these two examples in Vancouver and Boston and kind of put it in the back of their minds? Here's how we handle it. Here's how we don't handle it.
Yeah, I think Vic, it all comes down to experience and who has the experience handling things. I mean, in Boston, for example, Don Sweeney's been around a long time as a player and now as a manager. Joe Sacco has been around a long time as an assistant coach, now as a head coach. Cam Neely, the president, been around a long, long time as a player and now as an executive. They've all had a lot of time in the locker rooms. And you're talking about two veterans in Pastrnak and Marchand who didn't want this to disrupt the team. You're talking about a totally different situation than that in Vancouver. Yes, you do have Jim Rutherford as a president who's been around for decades and who probably could have dictated the way this thing should be handled. But the manager there hasn't been around very long and is not of Swedish descent, meaning that he hasn't dealt with North American issues. I wouldn't think He hasn't played in North America. He hasn't, so anyways, I think that it's the experience of the management and the coaching staff and the captain and the leadership. The more experience they have and the more that they've seen how to handle it and how not to handle it.
And we will see now if Patrick Allvin's trade of JT Miller and keeping Elias Pettersson just for now will result in a more peaceful situation and more success for the Vancouver Canucks going forward. That will close our show for today. Thanks to Brian Boucher from the NHL on TNT and NBC Sports Philadelphia for joining us. Thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program. Thank you, as always, to our great listeners. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. All of our podcasts are on all platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and our complete catalog can be found on our website, nhlwraparound.com. So please subscribe, and also check out some of our shorter clips on X at NHL Wraparound. New York Centric drops tomorrow with Arthur Staple, and he will have plenty to say about the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils. And on Wednesday and Friday, we will also have short shifts with more immediate and in-depth coverage of the NHL. So, Neil, great show today, and look forward to getting back at it tomorrow with New York Centric and then short shifts.
I'm ready and waiting.
We can't wait to have you join us. So, to our listeners, on behalf of Neil, I'm Vic. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.